I'm sitting here with Matt McInnes Watson. It's been a while. Tell everyone what you're doing. You just moved, huh?
Yeah, we just moved. I did the cross country trip with a pregnant woman and a 2-year-old. So that was, and a cat. My cat just come into the screen and yeah, took the ride with us the whole way. It was good. Good to see the country actually. We got on one road in California and we got off in Tennessee. I was like, that's fucking crazy. So yeah, we've moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, and yeah, it's been great so far. I kind of jumped straight in with the NFL Combine group straight away. Basically, like the first couple of days we were there, I've been helping out with a facility here called Triple F. My buddy Rich Burnett, who's the guy that owns Plyometrics. Um, yeah, he's the president there of the facility, and yeah, we're working together and doing some cool stuff already.
Because so you were in California, but you weren't at a facility, were you?
No, I wasn't. We were just out there. It was our first kind of step into the US with a visa, and yeah, just we liked California, but quickly realised that the family was growing and the cost of living is not that preferable. So yeah, Tennessee is much more preferable. So yeah, but it's been good so far. It's nice to actually have seasonal weather. Sounds weird, but we live in the Middle East and it was all the same. And then we're like, oh, California's quite the same all year round as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Um. All right, man. We're gonna talk tendons because that's all I care about, and I'm just going on a string of getting a bunch of people on to talk random things on tendons and speculate on what's going on. But your system, I guess the tier system, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, could you get into? Let's go background. How did you come up with this? Like your system of plyometrics? Because I guess for me, not being a track and field guy is like, and then getting into tendons is like this system makes a whole lot of sense for
Yeah.
probably just actually addressing most things of the tendon. But yeah, tell me the how it originated.
Well, I didn't come up with any of it. It's all from my mentor, sensei, whatever you want to fucking call it, the coach that coached me as a high jumper and coached me as a coach. And I just, I was learning from him from the minute that I was an athlete, really. Like just interesting about how he presented things, and no one else really spoke like he did. So, kind of similar to yourself, and having like a bit of someone to, bit of a north star to kind of look at. And he had taken a similar system from his coach, who was a Hungarian guy, track and field guy, was based in kind of a lot of Eastern European training systems, did a lot of work with the Polish, did a lot of work, I'm guessing then that interlinked into Soviet Union stuff. So his name was Zoltan Tenke. Um, it's funny actually, you can go back and you can see quite a few books that he'd done with med ball stuff and there was some plyo stuff. But yeah, Eric had taken that and kind of really molded his own system of having it. I mean, it's as stupidly simple as having lighter movements, having middle, like medium movements, and then having super intense movements. And on the kind of lateral to that is the deep movements, and it's kind of as it's the system for idiots, really. But inside that, then you can dig a lot deeper into like how to execute that certain level of intensity and why you'd want to execute it in that way. And really, it's just a little deeper than just calling movements extensive and intensive. That's as good as it gets, sort of thing. So, yeah, it's kind of a case of me then kind of taking this forward and seeing if I can kind of go a little bit further with how it fits to different sports. So, if you are like an ice sports player, like what does it look like to use the tiered system? Are you going to have more of this or do you need more of that? If you're a track guy, do you need this high intense stuff if you're already doing high intense stuff when you're long jumping or whatever? So that for me has been like the big learning curve. There's been like certain sports are going to need like a certain level of those four different things, whether it's intensity, whether it's volume, whether it's frequency, whether it is you use a certain tier at a certain time of year kind of exactly the same you would do with strength training, right? If you're trying to get ready for certain times of the year, you might move in a different way. You might increase the intensity, drop the volume, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I've tried to attack it with like taking it a step further.
What group of people was it made for in the first place?
Mostly track and field, and that was kind of like jumpers, sprinters, and multi-eventers. So I know that I'm not sure that there was that many like heavy throwers using it, like shot putters or javelin throwers or hammer throwers or whatever. But I do feel like there was still a crossover because of the multi events aspect there as well. So, um, but from that, like Eric then used it within team sports. I don't know how much he used it in team sports in comparison to like what I've done. Like I've kind of stopped working in track and now I primarily work in team sports. So, but again, Eric could tell me differently. I met Eric when he was late 50s, so he probably did do it for 20, 30 years, but I just wasn't there. And you know, he's not told me every fucking story that he's been through. So yeah, maybe he did, but it's kind of been like, well, I took the track side of it and now I'm trying to make it more accessible for everyone that needs tendons to develop, you know, force in whatever way that we want them to. So yeah, that's kind of been my mission with it.
Yeah, so there's this I don't know if idea early off season whatever, like people start with extensive. You do a bunch of extensive and then you do intensive. Um, but are you doing everything all the time?
Yeah, obviously there's a learning component. Like what you're going to learn, and you're going to use the easy stuff first, and that's how you're going to learn the movement patterns, and then you're just going to scale things up. But yeah, I'll stack. You'll always do all four, but you'll just do them to a certain degree, and it's just kind of like if at certain times of the year, okay, I'm not going to be doing like super deep work, or I'm not going to be doing super intense work because we're in mid-season or whatever. We're not doing massive volumes of medium work. We're still going to do a little bit of it because it's just kind of checking boxes. You're going to do a certain amount of isos because you know, fuck it, like it's going to make my knees feel good. So I'm going to do some isos, and it's just going to stay there. And if I have to do it 2 or 3 times a week, then great, cool. Even if it does nothing, it's at least peace of mind. So there's that to it, but there's also I do still think that there's like certain qualities that are there to be had and to be continually developed. I'm of like a more of a chain of thought that the the neurological way of looking at it is that there's still levels of skills to these movements and structure of these tiers. And if you take your foot off it too much, then you just completely lose it. And I kind of see, especially the higher intensity stuff, I see it the same as sprinting. Like once you back off of it for more than 10 days, you're going to lose the neuromuscular like output in that movement, whether it's the firing rate, whether it's an actual physiological tissue thing. There is something lost there, I think, and people know about it straight away. And you just get that basic feedback. But yeah, I try to keep everything in there year long and just undulate what I need to at certain times.
Hmm. The so I well I just talked to Joel yesterday and like Joel Smith, track and field background. You have a track and field background. I don't have
Yeah.
any. I just play basketball and my patellar tendon blows up and it's like, oh, what's going on? And I had to I had to, it was a lot it took a lot of time to learn what was going on, but I feel like track and field, like your system or probably any good track and field coach has a good grasp on preventing like an Achilles, a patellar, because I guess those things, volume, frequency, intensity, and in the basketball like team sport world, how many people know about that? It seems a lot
Well, I
less rare
think
because you can still get away with like for basketball, if my left knee is but like blowing up because I taken time off, I can still get away with it because I can shoot 3 pointers and my team can win the game. But like if you're track and field and your left knee's blown up, you're not going to be as fast. So it's like you have to have good tendons.
yeah, the track and field world is weird. It's like unless you're like 90% healthy and above, or like 90% just feeling good, you're not going to be doing your event. Like you're not going to be doing anywhere near to close to what you would do in competition. But like you say, in a team sport, I can like maybe I can just work on just shooting. I'm just doing pull-up jumpers today. I'm not driving to the basket. There's no hard cuts in and out. And it's also the blessing and disguise as to why you also do get a lot of knee problems in something like basketball, is because it's fun and you can play lots of it. And track is not fun. And you like there's a sheet for most of the time. It's like, right, you've got 10 jumps tonight, and that is how I've always got a monitor on volume. And you tell your coach after 8 jumps, my knee's bugging me, you're like, cool, I'm probably not going to do more than 8 jumps next week. And it's going to take a long time for us to build up that capacity. So it's so many more numbers. It's like being in a weight room. It's like understanding that when we get to a certain number of something, it's probably time to shut it down because we see the diminishing quality. But you can hide in team sports so much. So it tends to be that case that you're always tracking that volume and the relationship with intensity.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could. This is the way I kind of have been looking at things for many years, and I haven't challenged it or had it challenged. I look at everything from a structural, like you look at the structure, and then the other side you're looking at neurological. Um, I think those are the two buckets. I don't know what else anyone could add into it when you're talking about like jumping high or sprinting faster. Is like the structure has to be in place, and then you need to be able to coordinate everything. If we could stay, let's take neurological out because I know you like that, the neurological side, the structural side. I guess muscle, tendon, bone. Those are kind of the big ones. Fascia's kind of way out there. Who knows what's going on? But when you look at your system, if you look at your system, like light tier, I'm gonna
Yeah.
butcher it. I've been to your seminar, but light tier, medium tier, right? Ping tier, and then deep tier. How do you look at what are the effects on the structure of muscle, tendon, bone? I don't know if you want to go to bone, muscle, tendon unit. What do you think is the effect on the structure by doing all those?
Before we get into this random thought, because you just said that, like let's take away the neuromuscular standpoint. I wonder too as well with a lot of like good plyometric systems. I wonder if there is such a high quality coordinative capacity from someone that's done a lot of volume of it that they can get away from destroying themselves structurally a lot more than someone that is like the ape that just hammers the nail sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, anyway, but that's just a random passing thought. So that's a whole other conversation.
Meaning,
So
so like
structure,
what you're getting at is like what you're getting at is well, you move in a certain way or you activate things in a way to minimize the stress, right? Minimize the
yes,
stress maybe on the connective tissues. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you might have someone that has really shit control of their lower leg, or they've got and I don't know, poor mobility issues with their ankles, and therefore you get less like dumping of their shit. They don't have like the control to contract around the quads at the right time, so that it balances structurally how they land. I don't know, but there's a lot of thoughts on that. Anyway, let's get into the structure stuff for the tiers. So it's funny because Eric spoke a lot about this, right? He would say, right, we're going to do this tier, and it's going to give you like that's going to work a lot more on the structural side of development, and this tier is going to develop more of the neuromuscular output. Um, and he always spoke to the medium tier being the structural development side of things. Um, and Dan Buck has said this before as well. He said, no one is changing the structure by doing intensive plyos because number one, you don't have the capacity to do the volume to achieve structural changes. Like if you were to look at like testing it on, let's just say like an RSI test, you're going to give me as many efforts as you can that's within like 95% of your personal best. It's going to drop off after about 10 reps. I don't know how we as coaches can be like, this is the thing that structurally is making the tendon stronger, whatever phrase you want to say. So, and that really, like, it really resonates with me. It's like structural changes in volume. It's in continuous, maybe it's long bouts of bounding or high reps of bilateral movements on the spot. But I think that there's a threshold as well, because there's a lot of really shit plyometrics in inverted commas that people say that they're doing in this like real light, like pogo-esque Like I'm just going to bounce on the spot a bit and assume that I'm going to get some adaptation change, which I also think is horseshit. I genuinely don't believe that that's doing anything. So you have to find this sweet spot of being like, this is intense, but I can turn it down like 10% and still make it look as if I'm doing pretty intense movements, but I can do a lot higher volume and I can chill at that. Like everyone can hammer out like 80% intensity, so much higher than what you can when you creep closer to like 95 and above. So light tier for me is, I wouldn't necessarily say that it is much more than maybe muscular side of the MTU development. Like creates maybe a greater ability to, so it does go back to the neuromuscular side of things. So maybe like actual structural, maybe it doesn't do that much. The medium tier for me is potentially where we might see change. And we spoke on the phone a few days ago. We were talking about like, what about the connection between muscle and tendon, and whether there is potentially development, potential development there in the aponeurosis. Is that the word?
Yeah, so like kind of two separate things. The aponeurosis is kind of like the tendon running through the muscle, and then the
Yeah,
muscle tendon unit's kind of like its own thing. But so
yeah,
like the aponeurosis, I don't know what adaptation could be. I don't know what adaptations could be going on there. There's like no research you can read on aponeurosis that's useful. But the muscle tendon unit, I think that neuromuscular coordination side is like, if you could have a really good tendon, a really stiff tendon, and a really stiff or strong muscle, but it's like if they can't work together, coordinate together, I don't think it's gonna work that well. So, um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's
When
I
it
don't know
comes to
the
just
I
switching
don't know
it,
the adaptation though. I don't know what is the word for the adaptation you're getting there. I think it's just coordination of muscle and tendon. Because like you have the muscle spindles and you have the Golgi tendon organs, and it's like you want all these things
yeah,
to sync up. And I
yeah,
think if the body, maybe it's a safety mechanism to try to shut things down. If it doesn't want to give you as much output, if those things are not as good. I don't completely know, but yeah, yeah. But I want to say on that light tier. So it's almost like you're just hopping on the spot doing like easy pogo hops over the person's doing. Um, yeah, you just think that's too easy, huh? You think that's too easy to get any structural change.
yeah. Like for me, it's a learning environment and it's a preparation environment for what's to come. Like I'll use it to a certain degree to, like I'm using a basketballer for an example. They have a huge history of rolled ankles. So I just build a ton of different multi-directional light tier movements, like 5 or 6 movements, start of their session. After they've done like a bit of a warm up, let's just move in different directions and just get you confident proprioceptively. I'm not going to be throwing you like into real intense forms of plyos and multi directions, but I'm going to just get the brain working so that you can learn how to, you know, anticipate, to contract at the right time, to stiffen at the right time. Like you're talking about the NTU and having this relationship of like you can have stiffness at both ends of the spectrum, but I think the conversation is it moves away from like stiffness of the properties of the tissue and stiffness from a neuromuscular point of view. So it's like you've got joint stiffness and you've got tissue stiffness. And everyone talks about the tissue stiffness, but never talks about the joint stiffness. So you can't have one without the other, but I know that you are very much more intrigued by what's actually happening at the tissue level. So yeah, like the
Yeah,
secondary element, I think the lubrication of what's happening at the tissue as well. I think that taking the muscular tendinous unit and whether the tendon gets a little bit of length to it or strain, and the same with the muscular end, I think that repeated movements within that unit, I think greases and grooves that tissue. I think when it's yanked super hard in one-off bouts and efforts, I don't think that it does that so well. But when we can cycle this rhythm through the tissue, I've got a belief that whether has any scientific merit whatsoever, I just feel like our bodies prefer that kind of movement. We live on that rhythmical kind of. Once you get moving and you're just like taking off one after the other, you're like, oh, this is starting to feel really good. Is it neuromuscular? Maybe. Is there also something happening? like like you've talked about with the IFL, the gels being able to self lubricate and continue to allow the tendon to glide a little bit better. There could be something there as well.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to separate the structure with from the neurological piece. Um, but
Yeah.
the volume thing. So like, yes, I've heard Dan Bach. I think he was the first guy to tell me that was structure. You develop structure from volume, like not from intensity, but from volume. But I guess if you did a ton of volume of the pogo hops, it's like too low intense to get probably any structural change.
Yeah.
Have you thought
Yeah.
of so like even Jared? I did a show with Jared Amflick, and he brought up this study. I forget who. Oh, Kongsgaard had a study on the patellar tendon, and they did some crazy high volumes for over 12 weeks. I think it was a squat, a leg press, 4 exercises, 3 times a week, just crazy volumes for the quads and patellar tendon. And it was like that volume, that really high volume, caused these significant changes in the tendon. So this is just to say that across the board, I've just heard everyone say that you need volume to develop structure. Have you speculated why? Why is that the case?
It's funny as well because like I wonder, does your brain go to the argument that volume in isometrics has it's taken such like a prominent place in like patella tendon rehab. Like it's like volume of an isometric, like long holds has been real apparent, and like you've shown some stuff recently where it's been a lot more intensity based, and that's truly what's going to change structurally. And I heard you on Just Fly as well, and you were talking about obviously there's a time and a place for those longer holds and how that then changes into more intense bells. What you got to realize is that even though these movements are sub-maximal, they are intense. Like they are, it's not strength training. Like the time under tension is still so minimal and so brief, but the forces are still pretty high. So like if you're bounding, let's say you're bounding over like 50 yards, you might get quite a few steps in there in terms of volume. But shit, you could experience some pretty high forces. So I think there's a slightly different conversation there with regards to how you might compare it to the strength side of things. Um, for me, yeah, I think it goes full circle to when I was writing a systematic review on. I was looking at studies. I was actually looking at the quality of plyometric research. It was fucking abysmal. I looked at 1,400 papers and 700 of them used plyometrics. That's exactly what. But the ones that had the most significant changes in highly neuromuscular activities were genuinely the ones with the highest volume. And I tried to eliminate a lot of studies that were done in people that had experience in it. So I got rid of the beginner stuff. So even in people that were claimed intermediate, um, and some of the landings over like a 12-week period, they were doing something crazy like 11,000 landings. Now, what those landings looked like, it could have been a load of lighter ones, very few big heavy ones, but it just showed me straight away that mopping up volume was pretty standard when it comes to changing even doing movements that weren't plyometric. So like it changed CMJ performance hugely, but they weren't doing any CMJ stuff. They were just doing plyometrics. It changed things like a squat jump. So I'm like, how does it change things with a structure? I'd be intrigued to see if they were to do all of those studies again and then actually do some form of um, look a bit deeper at the structure of the tendon and stuff. So, what do I actually think that's happening? I think that there's enough strain, and I think there's enough strain repetitively to actually stretch the thing. Whereas in the light pogo stuff, I think it's so muscularly based. And it's a funny thing to say, is a lot of people do like light tier plyometrics or very light pogo movements, and they'll use like a much more forefoot based landing and they won't get much heel drop. And I'm like, does that tell us that maybe there isn't that much stretch there isn't enough force to take the tendon through a long range? And actually you need something that takes you to a level where actually we do see big heel drop and we want that heel drop to happen. I don't know. That's just me just speculating some shit, but That's kind of how I see it anyway. I assume that there's strength, but if you have anything with that, then do kind of cut me down if you think differently.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think if it's too easy, you're not going to pull on the tendon because it has to be a certain intensity to pull on it. And then just think of the cells, all the cells within. What are they going to respond to if they're not getting pulled on? They're not. They have nothing. They have nothing to adapt to. But when you say the light is more muscular based, are you getting at like you're getting a muscular fatigue, and it's like
Yeah,
just laying off the tendon? It's just laying off the tendon. You're getting
I
a muscular fatigue. Yeah.
I think so. I think like I've done like a 50 set of like pogo leaps on the spot, and I just walk away with my calves feeling like they're just absolutely pumped to shit. Like that is like the resounding thing that I come away with. And residually, there's nothing that I think like, oh, my Achilles feels sore today, or like I've had real any response from the Achilles from doing that. Whereas like I could turn up the intensity like 10%, where I'm like, I'm actually trying to hit the ground now, and straight away, I think it shows there would definitely be like a steep curve when it comes to that. Like in terms of like volume and intensity and how they work, there's like a certain threshold that you can do a shit ton of volume at. But as soon as you turn the intensity up, that really, really changes. And I think it's because of what's actually happening globally rather than it being just more isolated to the muscles doing the work.
That So when you talk about the volume, like such a high volume of the light tier stuff, and the
Mm.
mediums kind of like you're getting a bit less, and then like the ping tier is like impossible to get any amount of significant volume. Is it like unlimited on light tier? Is the volume unlimited because it's so easy, or not?
It can be for certain people, definitely, definitely. But like the volume is unlimited based on your calf capacity. I genuinely think that. So especially bilaterally, that's another thing that changes. And I think that's a good conversation to have is the complete differences between bilateral and unilateral plyometrics, and how in if I was to speculate that there is 100% in my speculation, there has to be evidence that single leg, especially in just a hopping action of just using one leg, there has to be a higher level of tendon strain.
Hmm.
I, I,
What do you?
I think as well, you've got that definitely. Let's say you're using the Achilles as an example. There is far less supportive muscles and structures that can help on a single limb that's continually being used in comparison to a double structure that lands. You can hide so much more in 2 foot movement than you can on one leg. So yeah,
What do you? So we talk about the light tier, and yeah, I think of the bilateral pogos, like jogging. People like marathon
mm.
runners. What have you made of this? They can cover so many miles, but is that still like are they do you think they're still not really stressing the structure in like a very slow jog?
Well, this is it, right? As well, like it also goes to the fact that too many people use light tier or super light forms of plyometrics in a way where they're like, I'm going to turn the intensity down, but they don't think about the quality of the landing with regards to like contact time. So I think that you do have a like there is a barometer there where you could say you are more likely to get tendon strain if you can do this in a shorter time frame. There's the potential there. But as soon as you lengthen things out, it's just going to become more and more muscular. So when you watch, like when you're driving down somewhere, you're driving down a road and you can see someone they're not a runner, they're a plodder, and they are spending like half a second on the floor. There is no way, and you can see the deep flexion that they're in at the hip and the knee. This person is paddling along the street. There's just I just don't believe that the changes to tendons can really take place there, because it's just far too long in terms of like the muscle's not going to pull and pull and pull and pull on that tendon for half a second and then go, cool, now I can let go of you. The tendon's far too stiff to allow that to go through that strain, I think. So it's just going to dump it onto the muscle. And that's why you see like the overuse. I think the overuse injuries, then, if you do have something like an tendonitis, potentially becomes from you murdering your calves all the time and then doing something that is slightly too intense, or doing something that, oh, I've done a different kind of route, or I've ran some hills, and then you're like, holy shit, I've not used my Achilles in 4 months. And I think like those sort of spikes are massively apparent. So yeah, when it comes to the joggers, I think it's so muscularly based.
This makes me think of this idea, this idea of like the stretch shorten cycle, when it's like you go down,
Mm,
or the
mm,
muscles eccentric and then isometric concentric. But then I don't know how many years ago, maybe this has been around for many years, it's like when you're doing something fast, it's more like muscle is isometric and then the tendon is doing the lengthening and shortening. When you talk about those runners, is do you think the intensity is too low so the muscle won't lock up? So the muscle will actually have some
yeah,
excursion to it. That's what you're thinking?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely, definitely. I mean, you look at if you were to compare the differences between like a world class Ethiopian distance runner, and then you look at someone that is plodding along the street and runs 15-minute miles, they are in such deeper angles at the joints, and there's just no way that the body's going to allow that to be tendon straight. I'm sure. Like I just don't see it in comparison. I just think there's just going to be so much more extensibility to the muscle.
So you said this earlier on what was it? Joint stiff. You don't get joint stiffness without like the structural stiffness, right?
Mm.
Was that what you said? So
Yes.
like you're talking about these, maybe you didn't say it exactly like that, but you're talking about these the plotters, and they don't have
Mm.
the joint stiffness. So is it like they don't have muscular stiffness, they don't have tendon stiffness, so you're not going to see it in the joint?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what do you and also like if we talk about like how much intensity it takes to strain the tendon, they are on the ground so long, and they then reduce how long each stride is, and therefore their ground forces are so much lower than what you'd experience running at the same pace as world class distance runners. Like those guys are still experiencing like 4 times body weight, three and a half, 4 times body weight as they land, and they're doing it, 5,000 times in a 10K. So what does it do? It like you see a much shorter contact time, you see a much longer stride length, and the likelihood for them to be using more of a tendinous response is there. I, my mentor Eric used to say this to us, and it's a throwaway comment, but we would observe the shit show of endurance groups that used to turn up at the track, and they were exactly that. These people would just push more metabolically. They're like, I'm going to get fitter by my cardiovascular system being better, and I just grind through trying to run faster over these longer distances. And he was always like, you need to bounce on tendons for, let's say, for a 10K, let's say 9,600 meters, and then you can go to metabolic, like muscular pushes for the last 400 meters. You can't do the opposite. You can't pull on a tendon when you've pushed with your calves and plodded with your calves for 9,600 meters and then expect to pull on a tendon at that point. So that's why, like, what we observed, like when I was an athlete, we observed like Mo Farah. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he won back-to-back gold medals in the 5 and 10K. And he was that. He is just bouncing along the track. He doesn't look like your average plodder out on the street. He is, every contact looks really light and easy. And it was apparent because when he got to the last 400, it was just like he just could absolutely gas everyone out, and he could just push. And I don't know if that does that inherently make sense now when I think about tendons and like what I've kind of learned from yourself. It does to me. Like you're not going to pull on the tendon when you're fatigued.
Yeah, that no, I've never thought of that. That makes a whole lot of sense though. Is what because the tendon doesn't get fatigued. The muscle's the one get fatigued. Like the tendon can withstand, I guess, anything. But it's like, yeah, if you're running the first 90% of the race and your muscle is isometric and you're just using the tendon, you're sparing the muscle because all it has to do is what is it? What is the term? The exact term? Like it doesn't have to do any work. It just has to produce force. But then once you really want to start
It's like a
pushing it, now
recoil.
the The recoil of the tendon, yeah, because the muscle, if
Yeah,
the muscle is just isometric, once you make the muscle go eccentric and concentric, now you're getting more energy demand and you're probably having metabolic byproducts and you're going to fatigue that muscle real quickly. So, yeah, it's like 90% of the race, you're just bouncing on the tendon because the muscle can do it. Then you really want to push. You're probably going to be, would you be getting into deeper joint angles too? And like you'd be seeing the muscle, you'd be seeing the muscle that have more excursion. So, like, you don't, yeah, you can't last long like that, but you can do it at the end of a race
yeah, yeah,
if you have the
yeah. Like
capacity
you
for
say,
it.
you don't your tendon doesn't get fatigued. The muscle gets too fatigued to pull on the tendon and get anything back from it.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. The okay, so no, that clears up a lot with the medium light tier. The
Mm,
ping we were just talking earlier. Maybe I said it when
yeah,
I was talking with Joel too, but I think right. I'm just convinced that any max effort jump, any max effort jump, you're going 100%, you're fully warmed up. I don't think that's doing anything beneficial structurally to the tendon. I think it's just the neurological piece. But yeah, I
yeah,
think it really is just you talk about tendon development, and I think that's like, well, light tier probably not tendon development. Medium tier is the tendon development, and then ping tier, I'm like that's just testing the tendon to see if it can withstand this, but you're not developing it. Is
yeah,
that how you look at it?
exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I think I don't know if this is a thing. I think it is a thing when it comes to humans, but like you've done the work structurally and now you have to put it through the test that it's going to go through when you do your sport or when you do your thing, right? We would have done it ancestrally, but we would have prepared everything in a certain way, but then we would need to have gone close to that, that real hot fire. And if we don't, then you don't know what your tendon's going to feel like unless you put it through that. But like you say, it doesn't get the volume for you then to be able to get that structural change. But there is something to be said in the neuromuscular development in that we want that neuromuscular output to be as high as possible. Because if my 80% structural tendon capacity is higher than yours, I'm going to get a better structural tendon development, if that makes sense. It's going to be able to handle that higher level of force done at a faster speed. So it's all about kind of raising all of those tides up together so that ultimately the tendon can handle more, deliver more, and deal with more when you get to those higher outputs to allow your neuromuscular system just to go bang and fire everything that you want it to.
Yeah, so I look at the max effort. It's just like it's just fine tuning neuromuscular. Like I think that's all you're getting out of it is the neuromuscular. But it's also so few reps. Like what are you gonna do? Like 10 max effort jumps and then you're done for the day. And then you're not gonna revisit it for many days. Um, So yeah, you can't you can't really get anything done there. I wanted to say on this though, so this whole thing, you said you don't get joint stiffness without like the structural stiffness. Um, oh man, this was a few months ago. I was sent a paper by um, what's his name, Blazevich. I talked to Joel a little bit about this, but it was on a flywheel. They did a jerky motion, super high intensity, and they didn't see the tendon strain that much. They didn't see the tendon elongate that much. And I was trying to think of when you do something very stiff, like you do something very stiff where the joint angle is very stiff, you're hardly bending your knees, your hips, your ankles. Um, and it's like a ping tier thing. I'm like, is the tendon even straining that much? You know what I mean? Because if the joint angle is so shallow, how would the tendon strain? And but then I'm also like, how does this have the capacity to rupture a tendon or cause tendon pain if it's not even straining the tendon that much?
That's the question you've also got to ask. Right? In what in what sporting activities do you get the biggest tendon ruptures? Is it in the most intense? Is it in sub-maximal movements? I'm just putting that out there as like a I'm not sure sort of question, but it also should we like the question is then like I do this when I coach. Well, I've got my tiered system, but there's also tiers within the tiers sorts of things. Like I've got ping tier movements, or like the difference between like a drop jump and a depth jump. Is it the case that when you use the drop jump, maybe it is more neuromuscular because you're aiming to get off the ground and you're aiming to flex as little as possible. It's as stiff as possible. Is the other side of that in the depth jump kind of way of producing as much height and dealing with as much force as possible? Is that the thing that takes the tendon through the strain? I don't know. It's again, you spoke about that with Joel. Like, do we see that? Don't we see that? We're not sure. Does higher excursion or flexion at the joint, does that equal a form of tendon strain? Does it mean more extensibility of the muscle? It's I think in certain things it could mean that if it's super intense, maybe you are getting the tendon strain. Maybe you're not. I don't. It's so hard to tell.
Yeah. And then it's like the higher, so like the more intense the muscle is working, the more the speed basically. I guess more speed, more the muscle's gonna be working if it's a max effort. The tendon stiffens up. The tendon stiffens up the most. Like I don't necessarily know how. I think just like I don't know how the tendon stiffens. It has to stiffen up, or it's going to strain too much and then pop. So it's like on that really stiff joint angle thing, like the drop jump where you're trying to get up real quick, was like from a high height or something. The tendon's going to stiffen up. The tendon's going to stiffen up more in that than it's going to stiffen up in a deep counter movement jump, because the time is shorter, so the tendon stiffens up. The
Yeah.
time is longer. So that's, I think, for
Yeah.
me, that's where I started creating this distinction of compliance versus stiffness. That when you do something a little bit slower or a little bit deeper, like the distinction I used, I think, which kind of pissed some people off, but it was Michael Jordan doing his free throw line dunk, and you can see the joint angle is very minimal. And then it was, I think, what's that wrestler, Derrick Henry maybe, or something? He
Yeah.
did a dunk,
Yeah.
and he basically, his butt was like touching his ankles, and I'm like,
Yeah.
this is patellar tendon compliance because he's going so deep, he's taking so long that the tendon is going through a big range. And then Michael Jordan is a stiff tendon because the joint angle is so tiny. But I didn't really get at how much are the tendons. I don't know how much are the tendons straining. I don't know the answer to that. But I do think that Michael Jordan's tendon is acting very stiff. Derrick Henry's is acting very compliant.
Yeah. It's such a hard way, like the strain, stiffness, and compliance. Stiffness and compliance can sit on the same spectrum, but strain sits in a different parallel, right? It's like if my tendon is acting stiff, is it then allowed, or is it then creating strain? So going back to what you said with regards to like the drop jump in comparison to the CMJ, like you're like it's much more compliant in that given moment. But you could also add a second component to it, is that it doesn't have enough force. So if you take away the CMJ and change that for a landing in a deeper position and then exploding for height, does that force allow tendon strain to occur in a more compliant environment? Because your efforts are to, and I guess you're still overcoming the force, right, when you're doing a counter movement jump, but it's pretty minimal. All you're doing it in a depth jump where you're falling off of something and then trying to go for as much height as possible. You're trying to go for height, and that's through intent. So the whole of that movement is based on overcoming that force. And I guess that when you're just fighting force all the time, it's like what we see with tendon health with regards to strength training. When I put a bar on my back and I drop into it, I'm overcoming the whole time. If I yield into something and is one better than the other? Is overcoming that force and taking it into a compliant range, does that strain the tendon better than yielding into something, or is it vice versa? So those are also another layer of how we can look at it, right? Is that stiffness and compliance, and then whether it's straining or not straining.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think when we talk about when I say that tendon stiffening up versus being compliant, I think the stiff tendon I don't think there's movement with the IFM. I think the IFM stiffens up and the college, like everything stiffens up. But when you move compliant, I think that's where you get, because it's longer. Yeah, I think you get the sliding and rotating of the college's fascicles with
Yeah.
the, like, because of the IFM. The IFM gel is not acting very stiff. It's acting as a compliant, like an elastic compliant thing when you move a little bit slower. And I was kind of pairing this up with age. I was like, now obviously NBA guys, they're all outliers, but it's like as they get older, they don't move compliant. They move stiff, and it's like, could you match that up with the structure and just say that the IFM gel is drying up, so you don't have the capacity to be compliant. You only have the capacity to be stiff, and the joint angles show it. The joint because they're not ever getting into deep positions when they're trying to jump.
So what do you do? Like on that spectrum of yielding and overcoming, if you're to match it with compliant and stiffness, you overcome everything in that stiff range when you need to be able to yield more. So if we go to the final piece of the four tiers, is the deep tier or yielding based landing and takeoff movements. They're not plyometric, but you land, you receive force, and then you look to get out of that movement. I think there is something to be said with the ability to allow your tendon to be more compliant. Like you say, the IFM allowing some gliding and movement, and like so many, like I have no scientific evidence on any of the deep tier movements. If you can find stuff, great. But it's like, there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. But anecdotally, so many people that I work with have just said that it just feels like it greases and grooves the joint. Like it just, whether it's to do with, it could just be a fucking blood flow thing. Because you get into a deep range and you just oscillate in something like that, it pumps the shit out of your quads and your glutes. But also, is there a secondary element to helping the tendon? There could be.
Where did that even come out of? The deep tier? Like, was there
Comes
any
from
idea
Eric.
of a more compliant joint range, or was it just like, yeah, where did it come from?
It came from, I think, a lot of, so it comes from Zoltan. Because I remember Eric saying to me, he was like, I was the biggest, strongest decathlete out of the whole group. I was one of the best dynamically. I was one of the best and strongest in a deep squat. He's like, and then I met Zoltan and he made us do deep tier. And he's like, I couldn't fucking walk for a week. The DOMs that I had, like, it was like a whole level, different level of fatigue. And I think his idea, Zoltan's idea, was that everything that we do was stiff and overcoming. We need some compliance and we need to train the flip side of this. It's like the dynamic work versus the isometric work, right? You need some isometric to do the dynamic in a lot of people's cases. And I think that is also the side to more velocity based movements, is having that deep range work allows you to do a greater, or it just allows you to do the faster stuff, especially for your knees and hips. Ankles, not so. There's not really a deep tier version of ankle joint based movements because you're always taking your ankles to that. But knee and hips is huge.
Yeah, there was a. I was gonna post about it, but I didn't have anything really. It was just an interesting study, but they took they had side views of the ankle, the knee, and the shoulder. So like the I don't know which one of the rotator cuff, but it was looking at the range of motion, and it's like the range of motion at the shoulder is so big, the range of motion at the patellar tendon is so big, but the ankle there's not much. There's not much range of motion. So yeah, going back to like the deep tier, like you go deep tier, you can get some big range out of the knee, but like the ankle, what are you getting? Like you're pretty much gonna hit that at any time you do anything. The
Yeah,
almost like the limits of the
like
ankle, you know?
yeah, like we spoke about it, didn't we? We were talking about like what we were going to discuss, and maybe focusing a little bit on the differences of a vertical shin as opposed to one that goes into like positive shin angle. So you can do a lot of deep tier movements where you get a lot of positive shin angle. And again, anecdotally, when people were telling me that their Achilles is really pissed off, I'm like, cool, let's not do tons of the stiff, fast stuff. We'll do some deep tier stuff so I can still get landings in you. And they tell me how much more therapeutic that is for taking it's it's less force. It's taking the system, the lower leg, through a range of motion at a slower speed that's far more therapeutic, and we can do high volume of it. Is there something in that? Potentially, I think. But I like this idea that I can fix the shin, but I can also drop the shin, so I can get into like a squat jump kind of position, and as I land, I'm getting that translation of the shin dropping forward. Am I getting some sort of length through the posterior side of the lower leg? Potentially.
Yeah, I was trying to find today. There was a study on the the posterior part of the Achilles and then the anterior part, and the posterior part
Mm.
was so they can be strained differently, and the posterior part, I guess, is not really. I don't think that's often the injured area of the tendon. I think it's more anterior. Just like the patellar tendon, the injured part is going to be underside of the patellar tendon, not the most superficial. But the to strain the superficial part or the posterior part of the Achilles was just walking was like the thing, but then it was like everything else was straining the anterior. But it was dumb because they were talking about like weighted plantar flexions and MVCs, and I was like, I wish you would look at like plyometrics, you know. I wish you would look at other type of exercises and show me how those are straining the Achilles, because I just want to see if just a variety of things is straining the Achilles in a little bit different manner. And
Yeah.
that, but that made me think of that because you're talking about when you're doing all of your plyos with a vertical shin. What if you start dropping the shin, and what is the effect on the Achilles tendon? And I think it would be a pretty significant effect on the Achilles tendon. I would think it would actually unload it a lot. And you could like work cyclically because yeah, I just feel like you're dumping forward, and how much can it really do? You know, how much can the
Yeah.
calf and Achilles
Yeah.
really do? Yeah.
Yeah. And it again, it shows it intrigues me by then how much, how many more degrees does the foot then plantar flex in when it extends out of that movement? So if the shin drops forward, let's say it's another up to 10 degrees more of plantar flexion. Is that like you say, is that laying off the tendon as opposed to a movement that you come in and you block to like more of a vertical position? So like a high jump takeoff is perfect. You have negative shin angle and you come in and you block to vertical. Is that just a far more like posteriorly loaded idea of potentially what strain the tendon then gets? Maybe it's a lot higher. And going back to the bilateral versus unilateral argument, a unilateral movement is going to have a far more vertical shin angle when it comes to creating impulse, as opposed to a bilateral movement where the shin and knees are going to drop just naturally. They're going to dump forward. So, yeah, is there then more patellar tendon strain than there is Achilles tendon strain? Because we had this like real romantic thought about a pogo leap being like high up on the toe, the heel drops nicely, and we lock the knees out. And like, cool, you can do a more dominant side of that, but as soon as you add force, your fucking knees drop and your heels sit on the ground. Like that's just what happens. There's too much force for you to handle. So there's a lot. There's so many other different components of thought when it comes to like the nuances of how you do the movement and what movement you're doing.
What's your what's your history been like? I know you in the past you said you've never had jumper's knee. You've dealt with Achilles?
I, I honestly, until I retired, and so in the last 5 years, have really been the only times that I've ever had ankle or knee issues. I'm genuinely not kidding either. I had nothing, zero tendon problems when I was an athlete, like genuinely nothing. I had one pretty bad hamstring pull, um, but other than that, I just dealt with lower back issues. So like it's fucking stupid. As soon as I stop being an athlete and do things more recreationally, like I tried to learn how to properly jump off of 2 feet, and that gave me patellar tendon issues. I was just like, fuck this. I'm not good at jumping off 2 feet, so I'm just gonna go back to one, and it's been fine. I do get Achilles pain. Like I've got Achilles soreness in my left Achilles at the moment because I'm unprepared. I tried to film something when I'm not warmed up, and I'm doing things that I could do 5 years ago or 6 years ago that I'm just I just don't have the background or volume of work that I should have to be at that point to do it. That's what's fucked about neuromuscular capabilities and the structural capability is your neural outputs will always be pretty high if you've had like 10 years of good training and then you do nothing for 5 years, your outputs will still be really high, but your structures will be absolutely dog shit. So you just get a ton of pain.
The I want to stay on that, but the warm up thing, you said you didn't warm up, and that was there was another piece of research on that too, that if you want to stiffen up your tendon, you just do a thorough warm up, and that's going to make your tendon stiffer. So like if you're going into something cold, your tendon is not very stiff, and I just would assume it's going to strain because it's going to strain more, and you're more likely to blow it up because you're just not warm and the tendon isn't stiff
Yeah.
yet. Um, the what were you saying about that? I was thinking of that earlier because the patellar ruptures don't really do it for me because there's not many. But the Achilles ruptures, it seems like that case. I mean, I saw one a few weeks ago in person, and it's the story just always lines up where it's like they had done a bunch of activity for 20 years. They're out of shape. They're trying to get back into it, and they just popped their Achilles. This guy popped his Achilles trying to fall. It was a false step trying to accelerate in basketball. Um, but I think, is that what it is? Is neurologically you're still good because you have the background, but the structures have kind of withered away because you haven't been training them.
I think so. You're overweight. Like this is for me. Like I think back to myself as a jumper. I weigh 45 pounds less than I do now. So there's that. This and so like your tissue is trying to deal with just weight that actually is not contributing. And yeah, I think that you still have the ability to tap into quite high neural outputs, but your structures are just not prepared for it. And it could be massively related to the lubrication of things. Like they did so much great gliding over such a long period of time. They just constantly were working like that, and then you just go boom and stop that. And 100% believe that you could have like serious drop offs of like percentage of just general lubrication of a tendon. Like if that's a thing, if you'd be like, right, you've lost 10% of that because you've not done anything for like 5 years, and now you'll sit at that level for the next, 20 if you maintain a decent level of training. Yeah, it's kind of how I see it on a very very basic like way of looking at it. But yeah, I think so. I think we could still create it, but you just can't handle it.
Um, tendon development. You have a daughter. What are you thinking
Yeah,
of? What are you thinking of tendon development is for young kids? I mean, there's quite a bit of research that it's built from like 0 to 17, and then it's pretty much the way it is.
yeah. I think there's got to be like two major development periods, right? Number one is like peak height velocity, like when they're growing the most in a certain amount of time. That's got to be a big one. Because obviously, post that, you have such a different structural change with regards to like how much that Achilles had to grow in that period of time just to match the bones. So that's a big one. I think like you got to treat someone with regards to maturation. Like as soon as they've gone through that period, there has to be a focus on making sure that how you like monitor volume and intensity is important with dynamic stuff and keeping like good strength work in there. And then you're looking at the biggest chemical balances with regards to like testosterone. Like when are men going through that biggest hit of puberty? It might line up with peak height velocity, but it doesn't always. Some people are pretty linear. Some people are like crazy height increases and they don't grow from like 14 onwards, but then they might get a big increase of testosterone, get beards or whatever at 16, 17. So I think there's a couple that you can go by. I think women is potentially, because of maturation stuff, I think you've got to get stiffness stuff into women earlier than you do men. I genuinely believe it. The female game is such a longer process. Eric used to say this to us all the time as well. Like women need less intense work and lots more volume work. And when I think about it, it makes sense with regards to structural change. I don't know. I don't know the chemical like interaction with regards to like male um like testosterone versus what happens estrogen wise with regards to tendon growth. But I get the vibe that men's tend to be a lot better with output because of those chemical balances and stuff. So um, looking at my daughter, it's crazy. Like I see her jump off things, and I'm like, if I did that and landed in the position that you just landed in, I'd be in a hell of pain. But she does it completely cold and does it over and over and over again. And like we said on the phone before we got on here, they are just so soft. There is so much fluid in that tissue that it's literally like a rubber band. Like calling tendons rubber bands when you're over the age of 20, I think is like you're dealing with ropes, you're not dealing with bands at this point. Um, and I don't, yeah, I think that kids are genuinely, they're just so elastic that it's more, the muscle and the tendon are almost like one rather than they are those separate entities.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder that peak height velocity, if all these cases of like Osgood Schlatter or like Sinding
Mm-hmm.
Larson or Sever's disease, yeah, I wonder if that has to do with it, or maybe it's just random. But that's what they say with the patellar tendon is like if you mess it up in around that time period, then it's probably going to have pathology for life. But if you don't mess it up in that time period, you're probably good. There's only
Yeah.
like two pieces of research on that, but it's not the case with the Achilles because anyone can get Achilles. But patellar is like, why did I get patellar tendon pain on both of my knees? Maybe I was overloading myself when I had like during or after that critical growth period because I had a growth spurt when I was like a junior senior in high school, and I went from yeah, I went it was a crazy growth spurt, but man, jumper's knee has plagued me for the rest of my life, and it's like
Yeah.
maybe I
Yeah.
just overloaded at that time.
I had a really bad bout of osteoarthritis when I was about 14, 15. Um, and I was growing. I didn't have massive growth spurts. I was pretty like I was always one of the taller kids in school. Like in every year, I had a couple of friends that were like 5 inches shorter than me, and then in like the last year of high school, they caught up with me. And I was just like, what the fuck? Like, you imagine the damage that does to your body and like how your tissue deals with that stress. Um, and I had osteoarthritis for a couple of. I remember playing when I was playing football back in the UK or soccer. I didn't understand what the fuck was going on with my knees. I could hardly walk. It was that bad. So I just took a few games off and then I just came back and I was fine. I was like, okay. But if I would have carried on playing, could that have ruined my knees years later? It could have done. I'd be intrigued by it. But what was I going to say? I was going to say something about ah, um, the LTAD network or group of guys based in the Aspire Academy in Qatar. They do some really good stuff on um, maturation and athletic development through peak height velocity. Um, and they found that doing certain elements of training within, like when you've mapped that someone's in like peak height velocity periods, then you take certain elements away. Um, I think keeping in like extensive plyometrics was critical. It was really important for neuromuscular, like joint stiffness and maintaining that side of things. I think they did a lot of like isometric strength stuff, but they didn't do like a lot of deep range, like squatting or like deep range pulls or anything like that, just because of the structural integrity and the body's awareness of where you were in space. So like maybe it's just like a brain connection of being like, oh, when I'm in this position, should I push from here? Or like, can I deal with getting into those deep ranges when the tissue's potentially under stress because of growth? That's also what you got to think of, right? When someone's growing so fast, there is stress on the tissue already. So it's interesting then if you were to evoke a lot of high demanding like training and playing, is that detrimental because of that already being there?
Yeah, yeah. When you're growing, it's already like straining just because you're the bones,
Yeah,
Yeah, then you add more
yeah,
strain.
yeah,
Yeah.
literally, literally.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, All right, Matt.
It's crazy.
I'd have you sum this up, but that's going to be impossible for you to sum this up because we were all over the place. So, just tell everyone what you got coming up. Tell everyone what you got coming up here.
Mm. Uh, I'm I'm actually I'm launching a like an intense course, like a cohort course, where I'm actually going to teach people. Like I'm going to be doing like live training sessions with them and teaching people actually how to do this stuff, not assume that they're doing it the right way. So that would be a big learning curve for shit like tendon development, right? Like, no, this is not the extensive form of plyometrics you want. This is how you want to execute it. So I'm going to be launching that April 1st. I'm going to be like kind of, this is the first public place I've announced it. So yeah, going to be dropping that April 1st. It's going to be like an 8-week cohort. I'm going to be running them a couple of times a year and just going into a ton more detail, like a couple calls a week, cohort of like 20 to 25 people and just going much deeper than what I deliver already. Other than that, couple seminars, and then I'm shutting it down in June because my wife is going to be having our second. We're having a boy, so gives me someone that I can actually work on. I'm not sure I should like subject my daughter to craziness, but I think if you have a boy, you can kind of subject him to whatever you want. So, but yeah, I've got a seminar in New York, March 22nd to 23rd, and then one in Omaha, Nebraska, in April 12th, I think it is. So yeah, but other than that, I'm probably shutting down for the summer, and then come back to life in like September or something.
And we'll have to get another dunk session in Austin in the meantime.
Maybe in and amongst all that, we'll definitely get Duncan in Austin. You weren't there, you didn't come when Blaine came and everyone come through. I was like, we were expecting Jake to come through. I mean, like,
I
maybe
had
he's hunting or something like that. I
I
don't
know I
know
had
what you would.
no, I had too much time. I had too much time off. My knee was really bugging me. I don't like to be around people when I got patellar tendon pain. I just stay to myself. So that's probably pretty much what it was. I mean, dude, I took way too many months off. I took like probably 10 months off, and I
Yeah,
tried to get back into jumping, and it's an impossible thing to do. But now I'm pretty good. I just
yeah,
play a ton of basketball, and that gives me a lot of the lower intensity stuff and like 2 hours
yeah,
of it. And as long as I don't jump through pain on that day, I'm good the next day. And then I just keep building up. And I know it's going to come back quick. But I think it's the thing where neurologically I can jump high, but the structures have had 10 months of a break that they're not ready for that. Yeah. But all right, man.
Sounds.
Thanks for coming on.
I
We'll
appreciate
talk
it.
later.